Hello, and welcome to the Hustle and Know Entrepreneurial Experience. We are an entrepreneurship book club moving into the podcast world. We enjoy reading books relating to professional development and entrepreneurship and share it with the world. My name is Julie, who has a passion for knowledge. I'll be your host today. And joining us, we also have producer Shawn Townley, who is consultant, entrepreneur, speaker, and geek. And we also have Joseph Warren joining us today, who is co-owner of Financial Planning HQ. So today, we are going to discuss the book, Built to Last, which is Successful Habits of Visionary Companies by James Collins and Jerry Porras. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so in one word or sentence, team, give me your synopsis of the book. If you were the author, what main point do you want the reader to take away from this book? I'm picking on Joseph today, so how about you go first?
I think the synopsis of the book is that you can emulate visionary companies and you can copy what they do. And they used a lot of data to figure out what they do. And the main thing I took away is that you can do two things at once. Instead of being super rigid on one side or, being super innovative, you want to do both. So you want to have a core ideology, your guiding principles that you really believe in deep down. And you can have that and stick to that no matter what. But then everything else is fair game and you want to innovate, set big, hairy, audacious goals, they call them, grow evolutionarily. So, do a lot of experiments, try a lot of different things and see what works. And if you don't do both those things, your company will not last. These were companies that lasted for multiple generations. So that was my main takeaway. Preserve the core and at the same time innovate and update with the times.
Mm-hmm. Agree completely, Joseph. Like you said, the book is about businesses. So what they did was they picked, 10, 12 companies that have withstanded the test of time. So not companies that have just been around 10 years, but companies that have been around 50 to 100 years. And they studied them and tried to see what makes these companies visionary companies. How have they made it to where they are so far? Or how, because a lot of businesses, as we know, small business in general, fail within the first year and don't last very long. So what makes them different? So I actually was reading the book and there was this one part and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the exact thing that the author wants us to take away, if nothing else. And sure enough, it said, most important point to take away from this book, so I have to say it, guys. So it says, the essence of a visionary company comes in the translation of its core ideology and its own unique drive for progress into the very fabric of the organization, into the goals, strategies, tactics, policies, processes, cultural practices, management behaviors, building layouts, pay systems, accounting systems, job design, into everything the company does. So basically saying just having a mission statement and a vision statement and these guiding principles, that doesn't mean anything unless you're translating it into practice. And over time, obviously, all those things are going to change. Like Joseph said, the way you run a company is not going to be the same now and nowadays where we have all this technology versus back in the 50s. But the core ideology and the core principles stay the same, and you have to follow through with them. Okay. Shawn, what do you think? The main point, other than that. I know I jumped the gun a little on that.
Blah, 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 blah. So the one thing that you need to take away from this book is you have to build the clock, right? These are the people that put things in motion. They become the cult that everyone rallies around. They're the Steve Jobs types. They're the people, and there's always two of them. There's the ones that can do it, and then there's the visionary types, blah, 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 blah. And then some BS about, you don't even have to have a product. You just start a company. Come on. Really, don't dwell on anything too long. Just blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I am not a big fan of this one. the lessons here are you don't need a great idea to start a great company. Really? I mean, I think you do. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to sell something. It is a business. You have to, get something out the door. Without a core ideology, your company can't be visionary. What does that even mean? Right? I mean, how many people have written vision statements and they're just blah, 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 blah. So you're telling me now you can have a core ideology with a vision statement, but then they turn around and say a vision statement doesn't save you? Then I'm not even sure what that means. And then finally, visionary companies are like a cult. Okay, so I get it. You get that one guy in there that, is abusive and, but he's cuddly somehow and he's cute and somehow that's going to make a great company and you're going to outlast for decades. I'm not buying it. Sorry, Julie.
Actually, that was like one of the myths that they debunked. You don't need to have a great charismatic leader to have a visionary company. So you're actually wrong, Shawn. I'm just kidding.
So did I misread most of the book where they're talking about Apple? Good job. Did I miss that whole part?
What book did you read? Because they don't talk about Apple at all in this book.
All right, fine. They're talking about IBM. Boring. IBM. Got it.
Yeah, I do have to admit I didn't even know like a lot of the companies that they were talking about in this book. But that just could mean that I don't purchase
most
their
of them
products.
don't exist really anymore. This is a dated book. I mean, it was written a while back, so.
Yes, I think this book was written in 1994. Just heads up, audience. Just heads up on that. But okay, well then let's just get right into it, Shawn. What did you like and what did you dislike about the book? So
they almost had me. I mean, I did read Good to Great. A lot of those companies aren't around anymore, like Circuit City. I think there's some good ideas here, but I think it was a bit grandiose. I think they started drinking their own Kool-Aid at some point and finding patterns that they wanted to see. And I mean, some of the ideas were there. I'm not saying it was a total loser, but at the same time, there wasn't anything. I mean, this is a solid 2.5-star book for me. There's just nothing I can plant a flag in. It's 2020. It's a new decade. The rules have totally changed now. This book feels really dated.
okay then, Shawn, then is there anything that you did like about the book? Like anything you can say off?
The book ended. I guess that's a good thing. I think there's some nuggets of goodness in there. I just didn't feel like working hard enough to. I'm glad I was an audiobook and I didn't, because if I'd have been reading this thing, I think I would have had a hard time finishing it. I don't know if it's the writing style or just, I don't know, blah, 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 blah. Sorry.
Well, I mean, I guess in your defense, this book could have been a lot shorter. And I know we kind of like talk about that. And one of my favorite things is examples. And I love examples. But even I, the person who loves examples like to the fullest, was like, okay, they used so many examples. They could have cut this book like in half, if not more. Like you could have used like 1 or 2 examples per point you were trying to say. They used like 4 or 5 like per everything. It was just like on and on and on, and some of it didn't even matter. Like they repeated themselves a lot. It was just
so it probably wasn't fair, and no books should probably be put against Rework, because Rework was just so to the point. So I guess reading this book around the same time that we were also reading Rework, that probably didn't help things at all. So
same with Atomic Habits, because Atomic Habits was very practical, and this book is not practical in a lot of ways, I think. If they didn't give you any practical advice. It was like, do what GE did. Like, okay. Not that practical.
That's true. They did give you like a little bit of advice at the end of every chapter. If you're an entrepreneur or CEO, This is like something that you can implement in your company. But I mean, it's not very realistic if you're working from the bottom, So I guess I will go something that I mean, if we're going to talk about dislikes, I guess I'll add on to that too. What Shawn was mentioning, cult, I know he said cult, but they emphasize it's not a cult, it's cult-like. So these visionary companies, they are just so ingrained in their core ideology that nothing else matters. So, and I get it to a point, but because it's going to help your team be motivated if you have a core purpose that you're working towards. But they took it to the extreme, which is why it's cult-like. So the only thing, and I get it that you might need that, but for example, they had like Disney ideology, and they're strict on their dress code and all kinds of that kind of stuff. So there was an example about how they were trying to like make a strike, a little union for like a group of people, and instead of Walt, the CEO and all that, the creator, listening to the employees and sympathizing, because they were complaining that they couldn't have facial hair, tattoos, or whatever. They disagreed with the grooming. So instead of understanding them, Walt felt betrayed and was like, "What? How are these people, mad at me, like for having a dress code or whatever?" But instead of understanding them, he immediately, they fired the strike leader and basically like threaten their team. And I really don't agree with that. I mean, I don't understand how, that strict dress code is, or not even hearing your team is going to really affect them that much. Instead, you just, degraded morale. But that's their point, is that if you don't like their ideology and the way they do things, you can get out. They don't care. Right. They're not trying to attract everybody. It's whoever fits in their culture is who they want.
This is where it was relevant. Thinking you brought that point. Here's what's relevant to today. Have you seen what's happening to Facebook? You're seeing some of the workers now. That's been very much a drink the Kool-Aid, Mark Zuckerberg kind of deal. And you're seeing people start to push back on that, right? Defending the president, letting all this crap go on, not monitoring or editing this stuff. So that point, I think, is going to get tested a lot this year, both at Twitter and Facebook and some of these big social companies because I think the cult-like companies today are more technology-type companies. Mm-hmm. And it'll be interesting to see how that kind of works out. But so I guess that is one thing that the book does tie back to, if you're going to bring something modern.
Mm-hmm. They mention other companies, well, basically like all of them, like Nordstrom, and I can't remember, I think it might have been HP. It goes on to say, I think it was Nordstrom, and then I think maybe HP. They also really emphasize, their cult-like, maybe not HP, but one of the other ones that they mention in the book, they go on to say that they don't even want their employees to hang out with their company employees. So they want their employees to hang out with each other and those be their only friends, to the point where they're making like, Nordstrom country clubs, or another one might have done that, and like encouraging them not to have outside friends, which is where the cult-like comes in. And I totally disagree with that. I don't think that's right at all. But to each their own, I guess, and that's on them. But that's why they said in the Nordstrom example, where they had like a guy right out of college, they all have to start from the bottom no matter what, as like a stalker and then like a salesperson. They have to work their way up and all of that jazz. But you either make it, if you don't make it past the first year, you're basically like not going to make it at all. And the first year is like the really crucial time. Didn't agree with that at all. But on a positive note, what I did like, there's a couple points that I do want to say. I really like how they have most visionary companies, according to this book, have like a bottom-top approach. So the ones that fail, which is their comparison companies that they talk about, are usually where they have a top dog leader CEO who's like, no, it's my way or the highway. You're an idiot. Get out. I don't like your ideas. Blah, blah, blah. You suck. Obviously, your company's not going to do very well if you're berating your employees. They're just going to leave and go to another company. And instead is that they encourage employees in a bottom-top approach, where they encourage innovation and ideas. Because if you have 400 or 7,000 employees, like, they're going to have good ideas, and you just dismissing them is not going to solve anything. You're not going to help your company. So I really like, they used 3M as the example. They give employees 15% of their time to work on their own projects. And that's also one of the companies that they don't really have like a set product. It's just like, okay, well, this works and this is a good idea. Let's sell it. Like, they don't have like one specific target that they sell. Like, it's not like they sell technology or like TVs or whatever. It's just like whatever, like Post-it notes. But how the Post-it notes came to fruition is one of the employees was trying to solve their own problem, and then they, you know, spent their time cultivating it, and boom, now that ended up being one of their biggest products ever. So I really did like how they treat their employees right, and that's what most of them do. Okay, what about you, Joseph? What did you like and dislike about the book?
I agree with Shawn. There was a lot I didn't like. I didn't like the dry writing style, that they were very repetitive, so it was kind of boring to read. And they would just keep building in the sense that they would say the same things over and over. So the stuff that was in the first chapter, they just kept saying over and over and over. I think it's outdated. It was written in 1994. Some of these companies have run into a lot of trouble. I don't know. They use the academic books will also make up their own. They'll make up their own definitions of words. So they just come up with like an arbitrary definition of, this is a visionary company. It has to be 50 years old, which I kind of like question that now, how you can just like make up definitions for your own words. And it's interesting that, you know, couldn't a company be visionary and then switch to being normal? Couldn't it just be, it's not an either or, it's kind of like a spectrum, I would say, of whether you're visionary. You could be to some degree and in other ways not. And at the same time, there was a lot I didn't like. I think it was trying to appeal to too many different audiences. So like small businesses, entrepreneurs, CEOs. I think if they had just chosen one, probably CEOs or large businesses would be a better fit, that it would have been a much better book. And that's what I didn't like. There's a lot of different things I didn't like about it. Even when you were mentioning, Julie, some things they would say like were great. Like with HP, they were like, oh, they treat their employees so well. That's so awesome. But then other companies would be like, oh, we're just going to shut you down, and we're going to use these harsh tactics, union busting tactics, and that's great too. So I don't know. It kind of seemed inconsistent. What I liked was, I love the idea that you can embrace the genius of the and I think that's something I'm going to do in my own life rather than the tyranny of the or. I've noticed many times people are like, you can't do that because, you know, it goes against this. And if you really think about it, it's always possible that you can do two different things. Like HP they were entrepreneurial because they set up small site labs, but they were also a huge company. You can be conservative and also like, you know, be cutting edge at the same time. So I really love that idea. And that's something that I liked. And I also like the story of 3M. For some reason, you talked about the Post-it notes. I brought a Post-it note. And out of all the companies, I think that's the one I would have fit in the most. I don't know why. It seemed really cool to me how they're just constantly running these experiments, trying different things. So.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Well, that's good. I mean, and we've talked about that before, where it's the and, like whenever you're talking, don't say but you can say and. It's the and option. There's so many possibilities. But, and then also though, their core ideology, they say, doesn't have to be good or bad. It's just, it has to be something, you know.
They mentioned that with Philip Morris and their smoking, where they were all smoking, and it's not necessarily ethical.
They gave them cartons of cigarettes.
Yeah, for Christmas. Oh.
It says they gave them the cigarettes with their paychecks. Like, that's how much they love their products. Like, they don't even care.
Julie, I take offense. Apple was discussed in this book. So, did you read the book?
They were mentioned, Mark.
Where? I did. I read this whole thing.
They mentioned the Macintosh.
Different campaign.
What?
1984.
Wait, what page?
Oh, I don't have a page. For audiobook?
Well, I don't remember reading that at all, but it was kind of a hard book to read, so it's possible that I missed that.
Yeah, so you were skipping.
But what did they say about it? What did they say about it?
I'm thinking about where it's Apple is an idea. It's not just a product, right? So that's why people that buy Macintosh computers, they bought into the whole core idea of what Macintosh is, not what the PC was, right? So the PC was seen as this boring standard sort of deal, whereas the Mac, was the the outside, the trivial, not trivial, but they were the outside, the hipster, the cool kid, right? The PC versus Mac thing, the commercials and going on and brand. So it's you either find people that love Mac or Apple or don't love them. I mean, there's not really any warm feelings about it. It's usually cold or hot. And I used to be one of those guys that was on the other side, right? I was like, Apple, nah, don't want anything to do with them. And then one day I drank the Kool-Aid. The iPhone just worked, and it just works. And now I have a MacBook. And so here I am. Old guy. I just want things to work when I turn them on.
Right. I think that's why they make the point of the iPhone was to make it really simple so everybody could use it. And that's why it's the most popular phone. Who would have thought?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so moving on, last question. What is something that you learned from the book that you didn't know before? And give me an example of how you're going to apply it to your real life. Let's start with Shawn first this time.
I'm taking the story of Sam Walton probably to heart with this one because I thought it was actually a pretty good story. Sam Walton, even though Sam Walton didn't invent the value store, he took it to the next level. And I think the one thing that if I'm lucky enough to have my company grow to a point where I have other employees and get to be something big, I don't think I ever want to take on anybody else's money. I think I want to continue to just invest in myself because I think a lot of these examples with these companies is when you take on public dollars, your culture has to change. There's so much pressure to produce a profit in a quarter that it sucks. And this is talking from a guy who owns stocks, right? So I like owning businesses, but at the end of the day, that's to make money. Whereas I think is being in the business, getting a culture and getting it to go and get to that cult-like status, you don't want outside influences like public, or venture capitalists dictating to you what you have to be. So I don't know how I'm going to do that in a recap in a couple of weeks, but I think it fundamentally just says to me, stay with your own money, stay invested in yourself as long as you can. Don't take the quick dollar unless you're planning to flip a company. And I don't think any of the examples that they show here was anybody that was interested in flipping a company. I mean, I think that's a totally different mindset. Building companies to flip and then building companies to be around forever, two different mindsets. One, take the money and run. The other one, invest, build that cult-like following, and let it ride.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's definitely something that you have to consider. Like, what kind of business do you want to run? Do you want it to be long-term? Do you want it to flip? It's up to you.
Yeah.
Okay, what about you, Joseph?
I think with me, looking at my own business, I'm going to figure out I have a vision statement, but kind of try to discover what my core ideology is or what the business's core ideology is. By asking myself, they have a good question in there. What do I believe deep down in my toes? So what do we believe? And then once I do that, I think I'm just going to what would I do? I guess I would try to align it with everything we do. So I would look at all our processes and see, is this aligned with every single thing that we're doing? Look for misalignments. And I think that's the main thing. I really like the idea of, having a core ideology, but not just, there's so many companies. Like I was talking to a friend earlier and he was talking about how he was trying to be recruited by finance companies and they were all saying, we're all about financial planning. But then once they would hire him, they were like, oh, we just want you to sell life insurance. You don't need to get a license for that. So I was just talking about a lot of companies are misaligned. They'll say all the right stuff, like we're for this and for that, but they don't actually do it. And so I'm going to look at that in my own business and try to be completely aligned with my core ideology. That's what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I just saw this and I kind of want to say it because it's what Shawn was saying that he hated, but I'm going to read it. It says, if you equate the success of your company with success of a specific idea, then you're more likely to give up on the company if that idea fails. And if that idea happens to succeed, you're more likely to have an emotional love affair with the idea and stick with it too long when the company should be moving forward vigorously onto other things. Mm-hmm. So Shawn was like, start a company without knowing what you're gonna sell. Like, just do it. Like, but most of the companies in here, that's what they were doing. Like, they just started and they didn't know what they were gonna sell, and then later they figured it out. I think that's what HP was. HP started off, their first product was audio oscillators, which they actually sold to Disney. It's basically equipment to test audio.
So in what world, on what planet, do you have enough funding and to where you can just start a business without having any sort of profit or anything? How do you sustain yourself? How do you tell people that just start a business, just, you know what, take a year off, put a business together, don't worry about what you're going to sell, and run with it? I mean, what kind of BS is that? I mean, that's not real world. How do you eat like that?
Well, that was kind of similar to how Sony started too. At the time, they weren't called Sony, but their first product was a rice cooker.
A rice cooker, yes. But at least you can eat rice with Sony.
Yeah, but they were just selling like different technology products until they finally set a big, hairy, audacious goal, as Joseph mentioned, which was to create the first pocket radio. And they ended up doing it with the transistor radio, which ended up being the Walkman. And they ended up getting a Nobel Prize for that. But they set this huge goal that nobody had ever done before, and they thought was impossible, and they still accomplished it. So that's another thing that they say in the book, is that the visionary companies set these giant goals that you think you can't achieve, and it's either make or break. Basically, if you fail, you probably will fail. Like, if you fail your goal, you're probably going to fail at the company because you'll probably run out of money or funds or can't afford to pay people, and most likely. But make it or break it.
Sorry, not practical. I didn't see a blueprint for how that really works.
Yeah. Can I piggyback off of that? We need to piggyback.
Oh.
Can I piggyback off of that?
Had to have one. Yeah, go ahead.
So you need a product, right? Because then if you don't have a product, it's like, why do you even have a business? You definitely need some service or product that you're going to sell. I think the point is you don't need the perfect product, because 3M, they started off as a mining company. They failed horribly. And because they kept moving, they kept evolving and innovating, they were able to survive. And now they're this great company that's still thriving even now in our current times, which are crazy. So I think the point is that it's not just focusing on one product. It's really just evolving and changing over time.
Exactly. What was the other company? It wasn't American Express, was it? Maybe it was American Express. They started off just selling like money order type things on the sides of railroads, and then they ended up somehow got into the travel industry, and
they were kind of competing with Western Union, right? So
I think so. Yeah, and they just pivoted. So to me, this reminds me of just keeping up with the times, and it reminds me of the Blockbuster example and the Redbox, and how Blockbuster was so in love with their idea that Redbox initially approached them to try to get them to invest or buy their company, and Blockbuster's like, that's the stupidest idea, little machines where you sell movies for $1, blah, 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 totally talking shit, hating on it. So then Redbox is like, okay, well, we believe in it, we're gonna do this on our own. Next thing you know, they're the reason Blockbuster failed or went bankrupt. So all because Blockbuster was stuck in the old days, they didn't want to innovate. If their core ideology had been providing movies to the public or happiness or whatever, they could have easily been aligned with that by joining Redbox, but they were too stubborn with the physical product itself. So I think that's the main point, is that maybe, like Shawn said, don't just start a business without having any clue what you're going to do, but don't be stuck on one product because you're in love with it and you're blinded by your passion for your company, because that is also going to fail you in the long run. You have to evolve and innovate over time. So I think that's what the main thing that I'm taking away from this book as I'm starting my business is not to fall in love with the products, but to evolve.
So, hey guys, if you're not doing anything this weekend, let's start a business. We don't even know what the hell it's supposed to be for, but we'll just, I have a garage. We can.
But you could start with the core ideology, and then you could build a product based on that core ideology.
Agreed. Thank you, Joseph. Shawn, take that. Just kidding.
Sorry, Shawn. I was just kidding.
Okay. Well.
Okay. All right. No, wait.
What?
So playing the part of the old cynical guy.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, also, okay, I have to say one more point of what I really loved about this book too, is that they talk about more than profits. So having your core ideology can't just be about making money, because that's obviously not going to stand the test of time. I mean, you can obviously want to make money, but it's like what Joseph said, it's the and. You can have both. You can make profits and still have a good purpose. You don't have to be one or the other. And one of the examples was with, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Merrick and Company.
Merck, yeah.
Merck, okay, Merck and Company. They wanted to maximize profits and pursue high ideals, which is their core ideology, by developing medicine to cure river blindness and the drug to eliminate tuberculosis in Japan, even though it wouldn't make them any money. And it's like their core ideology, though, was to help save lives, essentially. I mean, that's not the exact one. I'd have to go back to the book to find the exact thing. Yeah. But the point is that their core purpose was to provide medicine and healthcare, drugs at the time, to society, to help it better society. And even though they knew that that was going to lose them money to provide that, they knew it was a good purpose and that it would pay off in the long run, which it did. They ended up being the #1 pharmaceutical company in Japan, and they might still be to this day.
No, I own some Merck because I do like how they approach things more than Pfizer and some of the other companies that they were being compared to. So. Yeah, I mean, that is definitely one of those things where when you're investing, you want to look at the company as a whole and buy stuff that you use, right? So, I mean, I own Coca-Cola. My family drinks Coke. So, I mean, that kind of stuff. I mean, where you can kind of get in and play along. And I own a little bit of Disney. So when we go to Disney, it's like fun. Hey, we're visiting our own company kind of deal, even though it's 0.0000000 whatever % of it. I mean, I feel like an owner. It's fun. So I like owning these businesses. Starting one seems, I don't know.
Well, look, Shawn, you turned around. Just kidding, on your hate.
It's dated.
I agree.
Trying not to be a curmudgeon, but I'm going to come off as a curmudgeon, and that's just how it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all based on data, and data it's changing constantly, and the world is changing so quickly. This was a big data-driven book, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think they started off like reaching out to a lot of CEOs and asking them what companies do they think are visionary companies, and they started narrowing it down from there, I think.
So what's funny about this, and this is an editorial within it, we can totally cut it, but so this book came out about the time you were born, right, Julie?
I was born 94. So yes.
What's happened in your lifetime, right? I mean, what's happened we've had two, arguably, this is our third crisis in that time period, right? So we've had the dot-com boom, bust. We've had the housing market just totally implode. And now we've had a pandemic / think about how fragile things are, and think about how these companies have either made it or not made it through those times, or don't look anything like themselves anymore. I mean, when I think built to last, maybe I am being a little bit cynical. I mean, this has been a rough period, right? The last, not quite 30 years since this book was written. I mean, it just really cries out to the resiliency that a company really has to have. You can't be just kind of slapped together with duct tape and hope to make it through some of these trying times.
Mm-hmm. Which also is what they say. You can't be complacent. Like, you can't reach your big, hairy, audacious goal, and now that you've made it and be like, okay, we're done. No, you have to always keep going and keep improving, keep innovating, because otherwise another company is just going to swoop right in and beat your ass.
I like the way you put that.
Yeah. Overall, Shawn didn't love the book. I don't think it was horrible. I think it had some really good principles. But there's no but, actually. It's and. It had good principles, and it also had a lot of examples, and it's also very long and lengthy. Overall, though, not a horrible book. If you want to read about companies' histories, I suggest you read this book because it's very interesting in that sense.
I love Julie's sunshine next to my darkness.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today to our Hustle and Know entrepreneurial experience. You can find more about the author in the description and all the book and all that jazz. And don't forget, hustle beats talent when talent doesn't hustle. We'll see you next time. Bye.